doing the introductions this week. In case you don't know who I am, I'm Steve Lawn. I'm the one you get all the emails from if you're on the SLAM list. And I get the honor of introducing Dan today because we actually share office space up on North Campus. So Dan Kiskis here received his PhD in computer science and engineering here at Michigan on the topic of software tools in evaluating performance and distributed real-time systems. He has worked in positions in government labs, industry, and academia. Most of his career, though, has been spent here in Michigan. Dan's also been involved in projects to create digital libraries, collaboration systems, distributed sensor networks, and requirements management tools. Currently, Dan works for the Teaching and Learning Group in ITS, where he's leading the Analytics project as well as other projects aimed at improving the quality and utility of our learning management systems, such as CTools. Here's Dan.
Thank you. I learned from previous slams it's good to be mic'd, so hopefully everybody can hear me. Yeah, Steve pointed out with just a little bit more on my background. One of the main, I guess, themes underlying all of the work I've done is using information to help people do their work, and making it easier for people to understand what they need to do and to solve some problem. So one interesting thing about this project is it gives me an opportunity to do that in another area and to look at the teaching and learning domain and the data behind that as a way of improving education overall and the outcomes that we have. So today what I'm going to talk about is how we're using, firstly the CTools Academic Analytics project. I'm going to play with my mic a little bit here. So the CTools Academic Analytics project, look at some of the possibilities that we have for creating academic analytics using CTools usage data, how that might be used by specifically instructors, but in other domains, and look at some of the challenges we have of deploying this as a service on campus. I want to start with looking at the academic analytics sort of problem space and see where we are in that. I'll look along two particular dimensions. The first is the audience. Who are we creating these analytics for? Because analytics should be actionable. It should be something that is provided for particular people, and it's something that they can actually act upon and actually do something about. So in this space, there are a lot of different potential audiences. There are instructors of a particular course. There are academic advisors that are following a cohort of students. There are the students themselves may want to know how are they doing in the course, how are they doing academically. CTools supports project sites where we do general collaboration, so it's not necessarily just about courses. It can be about collaboration, so different collaborators may want to know how the activity on, for example, a project site is being used and what level of collaboration is going on. Administrators at the department level or higher might be interested in how tools are being used, how courses are being taught and managed, what level of engagement we have for getting the students involved in teaching using the various technologies, and we can keep going higher up on the stream there. And the other is researchers. There are a lot of people in the university, a lot of people here doing research in academic analytics, learning analytics, and they may be interested in having access to that data and using that data for their own research needs of trying to understand the impact of technology on teaching and learning. So we want to, there are lots of different audiences that we can have. The other dimension is the data. What data are we looking at? What's data of interest? I'm going to talk a bit today about the usage of the learning management system, the CTools data. But there are other types of data that could be there and different types of analytics you want to produce. You could look at the formative evaluations. How do you look at how much students are engaged in the class using some sort of qualitative measures? You could summative evaluations, tracking along with courses and being able to maybe predict outcomes based on evaluations taken along the course of a term, or even looking at evaluations and grades across semesters and seeing how students are doing. There could be information from the student information system, previous scores and GPAs, other aspects of their academic record, their demographics, financial information, for example. And you may also want to look at HR data, information like is the student employed or not? Are they work study? Do they anything else like that. So there are lots of different types of data we may want to pull in, and we may want to look across that data and slice it in lots of different ways in producing our results. So we're undergoing in ITS, we have this academic analytics project going on. It's a collaboration between a number of different ITS units. I'm in teaching and learning. A number of my colleagues are here in the enabling technologies group, which is mostly the business intelligence group, the student administration group. And we're working together to take the tools and information that we have available in data and to collaboratively pull that together to produce a set of products that we can make available to campus in this domain. So far in this project, we've had some progress where one of our first tasks was really to kind of shore up our infrastructure. We moved the CTools event and session data that was being collected on a non-production system. We've moved it into the production next-gen data warehouse. So this gives us production level access and allows access from a broader range of tools than what it was available before. We've done some work with the conceptual data modeling, looking at what is the information content of all that data, how does it relate to each other, so that we can start exploring how would you want to access it, what kind of queries would you want to do against it, what kind of information can you draw out of that. And we developed an initial prototype of a type of reporting that we might want to do using course site usage data, and I'm going to be presenting that here, so this will be the kind of the tool that you'll see here. And this is a prototype. It's real data, but it's not a live production system that we have right now. So the target for this particular tool is the course instructor. So we're looking at, I'm an instructor for the course. I have a site for the CTools site for the course. How's it being used? So we might want to look at overall site usage, and then also look at how are the individual students working on that class, or in the site, how are they doing? And course sites are made up of different tools, and I've put the tools on my site for specific reasons, for specific goals. How are they being used? And are the students using them effectively? So before I get into that description of the tool, I give a little sort of background of what we have. So CTools generates event data. So every time an event occurs in the system that's significant, it records that in a database table. There are 160 different types of events that are logged. One of the most basic and probably the most popular, the one that occurs the most is presence data. When I click on and I go into a course site, it generates a presence. I'm beginning presence on the site, I'm present in the site. When I leave the site, presence end, I am leaving the site. So that we can see when students are visiting specific sites or when anybody's visiting a site. And then also for all the different tools, whenever a significant change goes on, or they read, create, modify, delete, submit an assignment, all those different types of activities, it generates events. Something to note, which is a little relevant later, is not every tool generates the same number of events for activities. When you're looking at a resource, you may just get, you have resource folders in CTools. When you look at a resource and download it, it's just one event maybe gets generated, resource read, content read. Whereas there may be others, like working through an assignment, for example, or an evaluation or an online test, may generate lots of different events for reading the assignment, submitting the assignment. So there could be lots of different events. So number of events doesn't correlate necessarily as one-to-one with an activity in a tool. And that's one of the challenges we have going forward, is how do we interpret this? How do we make that useful information and not just looking at raw numbers? We're early in the project, so a lot of what we're going to talk about is raw numbers, but just kind of want to set the stage for that. Our usage data has been collected since CTools came online around 2004. The current archive contains data from January 1st, 2007 for performance and database reasons. Back then, part of the event archive was pushed aside into a separate table, but we have we still have that data, but we're not really looking at it as much. The system has changed enough that more recent data is more relevant. There are over 1.1 billion events recorded since that time in the data. This represents 66 million unique sessions of logging into the CTools and logging out. On a typical day, and I took these statistics a couple weeks ago, I just picked a random day, there's about 87,000 sessions, generating about 1.9 million events, and visiting about 50,000 different sites. Now these can be course sites, project sites. Probably the important in here is the My Workspace. When you log into CTools, you automatically go into My Workspace. And so a lot of that number is probably just the login getting into My Workspace, but there's still a huge amount of activity of people going into the various course sites and collecting that information. Every night we take an archive, we take all these presence or all these event and session data, and we chop off and move everything older than 24 hours off into the next gen data warehouse. So it's at least a day behind what current activity is. We really do that for a technical reason that CTools, the running production system, needs the last 24 hours in the database to kind of maintain its information. Really, in case a session goes over, happens across that boundary, we want to chop it off and have it lose the fact that a session is going on. So next I'll talk about this prototype that we did. So we've taken and looked at this data, looked at the structure, the content there, and came up with a prototype to look at one particular audience, which is the instructor of a course, and what kind of analytics might we be able to prepare for them. So these analytics come from an active course site. It's active this semester, fall 2011. I selected it more or less at random, but I did take a course site which had a number of different tools represented on it so that I could show sort of some interactions across different tools. There are lots of different use cases for CTools. There are some people who simply use it as a document repository. There are some that use it, very heavily, using it for discussions and other, forums and chats and the like, and for other reasons. So you get a wide variety of those. This one just, in the, little bit of time I took to try to find a site, it had a good mix of tools. All identifiers have been anonymized for this presentation because this is public and this is private information about the students. So student names will be user, some number, and even the documents and the like in the folders are hidden so that nobody can go out there and say, oh yeah, that's that site. The graphs and tables I show here are created using business objects, which connects to the next-gen data warehouse. So these are all the types of graphs we can produce fairly easily out of business objects. There are tools out there that work as part of CTools, like SiteStats you may have heard of, which can produce similar types of graphs. I like this presentation because it gives us a greater ability to expand without having to go into like the code base for SiteStats and try to create new statistics. We have a much richer tool belt of tools to use using a tool like business objects or something like that to do our analytics, to do our analysis and presentation. So first, let's start looking at, so what kind of analytics might we want to produce? So let's start with a few questions, just basically about the site. An instructor wants to know, how's my site being used? What are the usage patterns for the course? How many visits do I get? When is my site being visited? What tools are being used? How often are they being used? So we can do a basic graph like this where we have, so this is visits per week. We have two numbers here. The dark blue is the total number of just visits on the site, and this is just the sum of those for each week. The light blue is unique visits. So this is how many different people visited during that week, and the other is how many total visits. So you can get an idea of how until the start of the semester there was very little, but there is some activity on the site. And then it ramps up and goes on. I took these statistics sort of the middle of last week. So we see Thanksgiving week, not much, and then up until the middle of the week of, minus the 24 hours before, et cetera, et cetera. But this is kind of a snapshot view you could have of the system. And this is interesting data. You can look back and say, okay, before my midterm exam or something, I had a big peak, and you can kind of get some view of, this is how the students are coming on, when they're using the system. They're trailing off before Thanksgiving, so maybe I need to kick up some things more and act upon that. The next to look at is sort of, well, what about during the day of the week? That's interesting over time, but what days are my students on the site? Which ones aren't they? I happen to know that this particular course meets on Mondays and Wednesday afternoons, I think from like 3 to 5, and I think that's about the most identifying information I'll give about this course. So we see some interesting behavior. We see that Monday and Wednesdays are the peak, or it's two of the highest dates or days of the week for activity. There's a lot of activity Sunday, probably preparing for Monday assignments being due and the like. But we see that, the end of the week, there's not a lot of activity relatively. There's still activity, but there's not a lot. And these are not average numbers. This is actually cumulative across the entire semester. So that's kind of important. Don't think every day we're getting, every Thursday we're getting 800 separate visits. So you have to kind of divide that. Is this sort of an easier statistic to derive at this point? So we could use this data if we're running a course. A couple of things we could do. One is to realize students are getting on earlier in the week. They're not be active as much later. So if I'm putting information up on the site later in the week, either students aren't accessing it so much then, they're waiting until right before class, and maybe I can let them know earlier on that, this is available here, and try to, this will give me a view of, if I tell them, if I see my numbers going up, they are listening to me. Or the other way of looking at this is to realize that students aren't using it, they're not getting on the site as much toward the end of the week, and maybe that's not a good time to be expecting students to be accessing information and to looking at that. I'd like to think of it the other way, that we would say, well, students aren't engaged in the information in this class as much. Let's see what we can do to maybe engage them more later in the week. There's an opportunity for us to put some activities out there that keep the information fresh in their mind and have them continue working through the course information. So we can break that down then also by what hour of the day are they accessing the system. And again, these are kind of cumulatives across the semester for for each day of the week. We see some interesting patterns where Monday, right before class, we have a lot of people logging in. There's still some logins during class, and maybe students in the class with their laptops logging into the course site. But a lot of, maybe right before the class turning in assignments. We see Sunday night, there's a lot of activity. A little bit Tuesday evening, a big rush before Wednesday, and then we see where it drops off. Again, this is useful if I'm going to have myself or a teaching assistant get online, maybe to help be answering questions in forums or getting on chats. I can see, what are the good times of day I can schedule that and put those people on there and sort of make use of the idea that I know when my students are on my site, and so I can do something about that, and I can help engage them a little better. I can also see that when they're not likely to be there, Friday evening, probably not so much. It's maybe not a good idea, even if my TAs are available, then maybe that's not the best time to have them online. Similarly, if I want to engage them more on Thursdays or Fridays or on the weekend, I can see where maybe my points of opportunity are. So the next type of statistic, we might look at, well, what tools on my site are they actually using? Not surprisingly, resources is the most. CTools is a great tool for being able to put information up there and make it available for students. So it's not surprising that that's how it's being used primarily in all kinds of different sites, and we get the most activity there. The next one is an LTI tool. LTI is the Learning Technology Integration. It's a protocol for integrating third-party tools into CTools. I kind of hid what the actual tool is here and didn't show it, mostly because it's more difficult to get to. I actually have to go to the course site and find out. But that's a challenge we'll talk about later. But clearly this is something that's being used strongly in this site. Other than resources, this is the number one sort of interactive tool that people are using on this site, this instructor has put on the site to get student activity. And the fact that they're going there, and really the only event here is sort of LTI launch. So the fact that this is only generating a single event, but still in the event count it's really high, is showing that this is really getting a lot of activity. And if you sort of scaled this by the number of events per tool, it would probably be a much higher, much longer bar compared to the other ones. So that's good to know that my students are using the LTI tool. And you can see there's some bit of interactions with discussions. My polls weren't really working too well. Not too many people were getting on my poll. I see some.
Can you say something about the resources events? I mean, does it tell you which documents are being opened?
Yes, and we'll get to that. Very good question. And if preferred, we can show this in tabular format. So some people prefer that type of view. Just not everything has to be a graph. So the next thing we want to look at is, well, let's, instead of just overall usage, just start looking at how are the individual students interacting with the site? What are students doing when they're on there? Who's using the site the most? Who's using it the least? There are opportunities to maybe identify students who aren't as engaged in the course site and maybe work with them to help guide them a little more to get them more engaged in the site and the activities because they may be more at risk. And then what tools are they actually using when they're on the site? So we can look at individual activity. We have the 10 most active users. It's a graph we can produce, or a table. How many events they're producing. This is just raw activity on the site. They're engaged in the site. They're doing things on there. And likewise, who are my least active? We have someone who's only got 9 events on the site. Maybe we should get in contact with them and let them know there's something going on. I did try to make, this is a proof of concept prototype. I did try to make an effort to remove any students who had obviously dropped the course and had only have events up until a certain date. So if a student did not have events in this, on this site after like September 30th, I considered that they had probably dropped the course and I took them out of the query. So if somebody's showing up here, because otherwise they were really tainting this list. But if somebody's showing up here with only 9 events on the site and they're still in the system, that may be something we really need to pay attention to. So then we can kind of look across all the students, and again, I hid the students' names, and see, this is just presence data. This is just, they visited the site how many times total. And this can be interesting. This is, capture, wow, I have 2 students that are really visited the site a lot. Similarly, I also tried to remove from this statistic the events generated by the instructors of the course. So this isn't just the instructor going on a lot. These are actually students hitting this. We have another sort of cluster up here that we can see, and then it sort of tails off. But it gives me, again, another view of, I can see for a given student, if they come in and they talk to me and I'm trying to engage them in the course, I can look and see what the relative ranking is. I can see, where they are in the sort of this activity list. And if I just want to see a general shape of, where are my top students for engagement, my bottom, this is a view we can use for that. A similar view, which is interesting, is this shows the number of events for each user total, so not just presence, I logged into the site, but how many events they generated, and then with a stacked bar chart by the tool they used. Stacked bar charts have their limitations, but I find it interesting in this case because it provides some really interesting insights. First, my top students, they are using lots of different tools, but I can't assume that somebody, because they're on the site a lot and generating a lot of events, they're really engaged in a lot of things. If you look this third one down, they're still mostly looking at resources. They're just looking at them a lot, so they're generating a lot of events on the system. And they're using other tools a little bit. But you can have students like down here at the bottom, this student's not on there very often, but when they are looking at a lot of the different things. So a lot of the different tools are engaging in a lot of different ways. So you can start to look at, again, if you're talking to a particular student, you can go in and say, well, I see that you're in the system and you are engaging in lots of, you're looking at lots of different tools, you're interacting in the forums, you're getting on the LTI tool and doing work, but you're not doing it as much as others, and you can start encouraging them to do more and help them, give them some strategies for that. Likewise, you can give encouragement to the ones that are on there a lot. You can see who are my big contributors and how can I encourage that type of work. So if we want to break this down a little bit differently, we can look at sort of relative tool usage by each person. So what I did is I broke this down. This is let me see. Let's see if that actually works. I broke this down where you have the students listed here, the tools here, and then the number of events that they have on each tool. And for the heat map, what I did was the 30th percentile and below are colored, with red being the 0 to 10th percentile, and this is by rank, not by like percentage of total or something like that. So I put presence at the front because that way you get an idea of just rough, just raw logins to the system and how they rank. And understandably, you get the highest are up here, or sorry, the least are up here, and the most amount of logins are down here. But it gives you a chance to look across and see how their students are behaving when they're on the site. Again, you can find some interesting patterns. You can have very active students that are active across everything, but they didn't participate here. A quick note, because this is a ranking system, like everybody who has 0 is tied for first, And so they're going to be all red when you have a bunch of zeros. So that's why you get sort of columns of zeros, sort of like nobody did this work. Nobody. And this is something, again, for us to look into as a problem, is why are assignments not being hit on a lot? Why are there not those events there? And are assignments being put out that are optional? I don't know enough about the course site to really dig into that, but the instructor would know that. The other point that's interesting here is, say, looking at somebody who isn't on the site very much, but they're, at least in the white for certain activities, like looking at resources. But they're red otherwise. It seems a bit of an anomaly, why that is. It seems like, yeah, they're doing okay, at least in that one thing. And this, I think, gets to the point of what events are being captured and what do they really mean. In looking at this data, I've come across, I realize there are at least two sort of personas, use cases for people who use the resources on a site. One is the student who maybe has their laptop, they get on the site, and maybe they whenever a resource is there, they download it and they have it on their machine. And if they need it, they go to their folder, they don't go back to the site. The other could be someone who either because they choose to work this way or they only go to public labs, and so whenever they go to need a resource, they always go to the CTools site and always look at it there. Or that's the way they think of it. It's like, that's where it is, that's where it lives. If I want it, I go to the CTools site and get it. So they could go back to the same event over and over again, generating lots of events because they happen to be referring back to the same document many times. So raw numbers, again, can be a little tricky. They give us some information of relative value, but they may not necessarily be the end view. So kind of a variation then working off of this theme is, well, let's just look and see, are the students downloading it? So this is just binary. It's like, if the student downloaded it and looked at it at least once, let's see the data. This is not a complete list, but here we have the documents. Again, I can break it down by each folder, each document name. I can go down and have an item, and I can see across all the users, did they download it or not? And so this gives me a view of a few things. I can look at a particular user and I can say, okay, yeah, they're looking at a lot of the information I've put up there. I can look at other views to see how often, but at least I know they did it once. And then knowing, as the instructor, I would know what these particular documents in this folder are. And I could say, well, this person really is looking at this, and I can draw some conclusions from that. I can also look and see, wow, this folder, all these documents, and people aren't really using them very much. There are a couple of students that may have looked at them and possibly found them useful, but when I'm designing my course next semester, or should I include this? Or I put some really good stuff up there. Maybe this gives me an idea to say, I should let the students know about this information out here because that could be useful for them on the exam, or in just their learning in general, so they understand the concepts. So I'll give, it's one of the goals is to make this actionable, give them information that they can use and to make their use of the tool better. We can give just basic table views of, for each folder, here's the document, here's the raw accesses. So again, I can see which documents my students are accessing the most. And this could be useful. Again, with any numbers, the fact that this was 1,635 times, well, that could be because it's really popular, it's really important, or it could be that it was the first one in the folder put up there and they've had more times to look at it. So based on that, we can have a different view. What we're showing here is for each of the documents and the resources over time, how many accesses of it were there that week. So I can start looking at my class overall of when are they actually accessing this information. If I put something up there, a document, they're using it a lot, are they continuing to look at it even if it's relevant? There are some in here that continue to be. There are some, you can clearly see maybe this is when they came online and they weren't uploaded until then. So I can start looking at patterns. If I know when I put information up there, I can see when students are using it, how often they're using it. So that's all my graphs I have. So any questions at this point, or?
Could you break that down further? So I'm thinking about a particular example, like when we provide students with a practice test. I would love to know when they first look at it.
Since we do have the we do have the data. If there is, there should be an event of they open the test, depending on how you put it up there. If you put it up as an assignment, or if you put it up,
PDF, right?
okay, you put it up, yes, then we could make a similar one for, based on the student of when they did it. Actually, an interesting thing we can do, I don't think I have a version of it here. See, this is where, don't stray from your script. Yeah, don't do that. Never mind. I had business objects up just in case, but then it timed out because, one of the things we can do in business objects, which is interesting, is we can set up input controls. So what you could do is you could actually set up an input control being your students. So then you could click and say, for this student, show me the graph like this for that particular student. Or for a number of students, whether you make it one or many. So you could do that. You could actually go in and very easily in the reporting tool, get that view and have different ways of looking at information. So yeah, you can, and I played around with that some, and again, if I were doing a live demo, I would have had something like that where you could click on it, you can say, wow, I can see this student's seeing everything. And you also do get a better view of sort of the spread of what they are looking at and when. And you could break this down. I mean, I think we have to the second of when they put it in. So we could break this down by day or hour or something, but there also gets a point of privacy and how much do we really want to be monitoring how closely the students are doing the work, and that's up for the instructors to decide what's ethical and what's good. So talk about, yes?
In lecture tools, we know everything the student does in the class, what they're answering, each question, great deal of analytics there as well. These data are interesting and we like to get access to them. So is it possible that CTools could make these available via either LTI or an API or somehow they could be accessible by other, I guess we don't want to use a particular business software you're talking about.
Yes. Thank you. That's the lead into my next slide. It's always good to have a plant in the audience for these things. There are two primary project deliverables that we have in mind here. The first is a set of analytics like this, a set of tools. But we realize that there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all set of analytics that's going to work for every instructor, every class, every possible usage. Academic advisors who are trying to follow a cohort of students aren't necessarily going to be interested in this exact data. But there may be a set of dashboards or views on the data that we can provide to them that are generally useful, and those are the kind of deliverables we'll have. The other is this learning analytics data warehouse. It's having this data available out in the next-gen data warehouse so that if you do have tools, you can pull it in other ways and bring it in and marry it with your information and display it. Now, from my point of view, what I would like to have is to make sure that anything LTI can provide its data into CTools so that then we can get it into the next-gen data warehouse in that way. And in fact, again, that's leading to my last slide of what the challenges are, is how do we do that? That's one of the things we definitely know we need out of this, is we need to make this data available. Tim's project and others, Steve's, these other projects that are around campus, need access to this data. They need access to, or they can use it. And there may be more there than they realize that they could pull in. And we would like to make that available as a service that you can use, so that we can't do everything. But we can provide a good set of technologies that enable a lot more to be done, and that we can then have this sort of shared service that is available to a broad audience and has the stability and quality and everything that you would need. So to get through the rest of my slide, part of this data warehouse is structuring the information in a way that's usable. Developing proper summary tables and aggregations of the information that make it more optimal to query. Right now, querying a table of 1.1 billion rows to try to find every event that happened between two dates it's complicated and time consuming, and Steve will tell you horror stories probably later on with the MSTEM talk. So we want to make those optimizations there and make that information more accessible and more easily used and efficient to use. And again, we want to make this, like I said, a service that support lots of projects. So our next steps with this then, the first one is engage the community, and this talk is the first step of that. We, as part of this project, want to know, what do you need? We're ITS. We want to provide a service to you. So, what is the appropriate audience for this? I gave an example, a proof of concept of a view of a course site by an instructor. That's something I think is useful. We can provide it. It's fairly straightforward to do. We need people to help us, work for that. What are the requirements for that? How do we actually make that useful to you? We want to know what data you want to see, what information you want to see. There are other possibilities of, if you're a counselor following a cohort and you want to see certain views, we're going to be we're working closely with Steve and the MSTEM project to get requirements around that. What do you need to know? We also need to explore, how do we want to present this information? Are these graphs useful to you? Is just tabular data is something that you can bring into Excel and play with yourself, a better way to do it? How do you want the data? We want to serve your needs in that way. We have tools like business objects that allow you to do a lot of processing, but it has its own limitations. So we need to look at that. How would it be delivered? Do you want this delivered as a page in your CTools site? Do you want it as a mailed to you as an Excel spreadsheet? Some website. We need to work out all those mechanisms too, and then figure out who has access to what, and privacy, security concerns are something we are very serious about, and we want to make sure that we answer those concerns. And then there's a whole, people in the field are familiar with the diagram of sort of the level of analytics that we have. This shows some basic reporting. We want the ability to do some maybe ad hoc reports and some drill downs and analysis. And in getting up to something more sophisticated like predictive analysis, if you saw like in the Signals project, requires a data model or a predictive model. You need to have some sort of way of looking at past data and predicting based on the current data. And we don't have those models that we've developed. Happy to work with people who that's their subject matter and likes to do research in that, and we have the data and help you work with that. So one of our next steps is to take this and to go into a pilot. Have some people that are interested in saying, I would like to have this for my course site. Can you provide this to me, and let's work through and build up a sort of a group that we can work with and work out our requirements for this over time. What kind of analytics, what kind of presentation, and solve some of these issues. Also, the other group that we're looking at, I've mentioned before, are the people, the advisors following a cohort and wanting to see how their performance is across a number of sites. Again, I mentioned we're working with MSTEM on that, but we need to identify who would the cohorts for this be, what type of information you need, and let's engage the advisors into that discussion and figure out what you want. And then running a pilot, there are parameters around that, establishing a time period, determining the data to collect to know how successful we are, and et cetera. And then developing all the technology and procedures to provide the analytics to do the pilot. Right now, I talked about in our current progress, we have the data moved over into next-gen data warehouse, but there's still a real big next step of going through that raw data and creating all those summary tables and figuring out what other tables we need and what other information we can pull out of that to make that the information content of that accessible. So a lot of that is driven by the queries that are used. So you look at the use cases, look at how that information is to be queried, and then you optimize based on that. And so that's work that we will need to be doing and we be continually undergoing over the next months. And then we want to look at bringing in data from other sources. There may be information in CTools itself, like gradebook and assignment data, that we want to pull in instead of querying the production database and possibly causing any kind of production issue around that. We want to pull that in as we can so that makes it available. So imagine some of these graphs up here, and alongside that is sort of their current course grade out of your gradebook and your course site. So then you could do some correlation between activity and the grades they're getting, and then you could act upon that, seeing that if there's a correlation that the ones who aren't as engaged are getting lower scores, then you have additional information to work from when you go and talk to those students. Similarly, we may want to pull information out of the student information system, like demographics and the like that we talked about. And then eventually, we would look at a large-scale deployment of this. ITS has the people, the resources, the infrastructure to deploy a shared service on a large scale to the community. We have experts in architecture that look at the database storage, the processing, the analytics engines, and can put together a solution that could serve the university community in a way that other groups can't, and we should be leveraging that. We can look at the data processing needs and set up the systems to do that, to do the periodic processing that needs to be done, whether it needs to be done on demand, and work out the best ways to do all that type of work. We have groups that are interested in and are experts in access and privacy, the issue of data stewardship. Who owns this data? Who decides who can access it, and what's ethical ways of accessing it and which isn't, and who should be, how do you protect the privacy of the people that that have private data here? Those are important issues, and doesn't mean we're saying you can't access the data, but just let's make sure that we understand what the rules are and that it's done properly, because we want to respect people's privacy and but have the openness that we can. We have support capabilities. We have the help center, the service center. We can produce the training, the documentation, all the things that are needed to sort of roll this out in a way. We have ways of doing the, managing the future upgrades, enhancements, making sure that this goes beyond. I've worked in the past with a lot of projects which were based on this sort of 3-year NSF funding, and at the end of that, who knows? With something that's in ITS, we know we can make a long-term plan, and we can work toward making sure that continues to be available. It will evolve, but we have those mechanisms. And so looking at the initial and ongoing budget deals. So finally, what are our ongoing challenges? Well, first is the point that was made, integrating with these third-party tools, the LTI connected tools. How do we get access to their data? We'd like to be able to pull that data in. We'd like to work with the LTI community and see if we can find ways of doing that, or at least with the tools that are being used, how can we bring that information in so that it's made available to a broader audience? There is, with a lot of data that we have, the fact that we have a lot of data, there is predictive analysis that can be done. You could go through, there's years of data to be collected across thousands of sites. It's a great opportunity for a dissertation or two to go through and figure out, how does that map to some particular hypothesis you may have. And then we want to manage our footprint in the analytics space. What new areas are there that we can provide significant value by creating a service that's available to campus, whether it's dashboards and analytics, access to data. We want to collaborate with researchers from different areas and help, use the requirements of your project to help become the requirements for what we're trying to produce, and to make sure that we're producing something of value. And then work to maintain the level and quality of service, and then keep pace with technology and make sure that what we're building now can last over time and will be useful over time. And if some new technology comes along, we don't have to rebuild from scratch, that everything has a good migration plan as we go forward. So, any questions? This is me. Feel free to contact me if you have questions outside of this. We even have a mic, so everybody can be heard. Do you want to use the mic, or do you want to talk?
I'm wondering if you could speak more concretely about the pilot in terms of the time frame you had in mind and who you'll select to be in the pilot. We haven't completely, we don't have a specific, this is the pilot, get on board or not plan in mind. Really what I wanted to do, part of it with this presentation, was to find out who's interested and find a timing that works for everybody and figure out, what's a good time frame. I would like to get something, say if we were going to take these analytics and put them up, let's say let's take over the next few months, or the first few months of the next semester, obviously would make more sense to get the data from the start. I know how critical those, first few weeks are of getting some feedback and, really engaging the students. That would be something that we would kind of, I think, get together the group of people who are interested, and we would work out what works for them. We haven't made it specifically. We do need to make some deadlines, and obviously need structure around it. But I also kind of want to make it flexible and make sure that we've done something that provides value. So if you're interested, talk to us.
Roughly, is this something that could take place winter term?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we're like the analytics that I showed here. Even if we don't have a full product set up where we're going to have it available and deployed and integrated into CTools, easily I could set up this set of reports to be emailed to you as for your sites in an Excel spreadsheet, if nothing else, so that you could see it and you would get it. I mean, there are ways that we can get to it that are not going to be the final version, and that's why it's a pilot. It's not supposed to be, it's not clean and proper, but it will be accurate data and it will be correct. And that will give us immediate feedback. You can come back and say, yeah, I did never look at this, or it'd be really great if you could give me this in addition. And then we can turn that around quickly, so hopefully within a week or two, the next report you get, it has those changes. So I see our pilot as being that. It's really driving that sort of iterative incremental development cycle and using that as a way of feeding in the new requirements and bringing those out. And then as we're building up the infrastructure underneath, the quality and the efficiency of what we're doing will come out of that, and maybe we'll be able to deliver it to you in a different way. We'll say, well, now instead of it being mailed to you, there's just going to be a web page you can go to and you'll get access, and we can work those things out with you. So we're really kind of, pilot may be maybe we're looking for partners sort of going forward to help us build this technology, however you want to think of it, but that's kind of the way we're looking at it. Yes?
Might as well use it, we got it.
Yeah.
You mentioned academic advisors, and when you were talking about them, you mentioned the STEM fields. Are other advisors going to be able to use this, or is it specifically for those students? Is that what you have in mind?
Well, we have a good relationship with Steve and the STEM group. So what we're going to do is take that project. They've done a lot of work over the past semester to sort of figure out what might be useful and what could be needed. We want to use that as a set of requirements coming in, but also abstract that to be something that can be useful by advisors in general. So we certainly don't want to be focusing on one audience and that's it, and it's not useful to anyone else. What we want to do is make something that is more broadly useful while avoiding assuming that one size fits all and that therefore it's useful to nobody. So it's going to be, if we get that 80% solution, let's see if we can get most of what you need as much as we can. That's what we'll be going for. So, but we'd be happy to have input into that. I would like to see, the more voices we have at the table, the better solution that we can come up with, as long as we can manage that and not get just all we do is talk about it. We want to move. We want to be able to make progress with it, and I think we can do that.
I'm interested in what your thoughts are with respect to student privacy and whether students might have the option at the outset of a course to opt out so that their data wouldn't be available to an instructor. Because it sounds like at least some of the things you said with the early alert system would involve an instructor being able to connect with a student. And I don't know if what you have in mind is by a student ID, so that the instructor would not know the student's name, but somehow that ID could communicate you'd reach the student but not know the student's name. Because I'm thinking that, when you had said earlier that how the data would be used would be up to the instructor, it begs a lot of privacy issues for the student.
Yes, that's true. I shouldn't assume that the instructors are fully up to speed on every possible rule and regulation and what all the concerns are. Part of this project is we have engaged sort of the data stewardship process, and that's something we've actively it's not just in the future, we are actively working on this to try to work out who owns that data, who should be allowed to see it, who is the responsible body in the university that if there is a concern can make the proper decisions for that. And this is part of that, because data about the fact that a student is active on the site is somebody has I shouldn't say owns, somebody has responsibility for that data and for the privacy concerns and the access to that. And we want to make sure the right governance gets put in place, that those issues are handled properly, so that there is a process whereby if a student doesn't want to participate, there's a process by which they can do that. There's a governance body that's responsible for that, or an individual. I may, if I speak too openly about it, it's just because, I have this, big world, everything's going to be great kind of view, but I understand all those concerns, and those are certainly things we're building into the project, and they're concerns we take very seriously. But I'm trying to look at, what's the big benefit of that. So it's a great question, and something where it's important. Yes.
I've got a follow-up to that then. Gathering these kind of data is sort of the easy part of this whole process. And we can go out and gather information about every click the student makes, and whether they open their textbook or not, whether they go to a party, and we could know all this stuff. But ultimately, it's going to come down to the instructor who has to make the call then. Is this student doing badly or well? So it's more the end product of how all these raw materials are going to get processed into something usable, some actionable items, kinds of things that Tim is looking at. I think is a bigger challenge for us. So yes, maybe we should collect these data, but be very careful as you collect them, because I'm worried that we won't know how to use them as faculty. Or if we handed stuff, and I see a student never went on the CTools site, well, maybe the student didn't need to. And there's lots of learning models that you have to know about before you can take some action on that. So I think there's a great amount of work that needs to happen once we have these raw materials.
Right, exactly. That's one of the first things we want to do is just make that information available. Make that information available. And from that, until people know what's there, it's hard to have discussions around it. So that was one of the reasons we kind of brought this up in this way first, is like, let's let you know what's available, what we can possibly do, and then let's start having those discussions. And there is training, and we're not assuming that everybody's teaching a course in the same way, or that they have the same goals in why they're putting information up on CTools, or why they're using a certain tool. And we want to enable that flexibility. And so having, it may be the case that what we as sort of as ITS producing something can do is going to provide you information that you then need to interpret. Because we want you to be able to do that. We want that flexibility. But the other part of that, of why we want to make the information available and make that database available, is so that if people have tools which can build some of that business knowledge and some of those decisions into the analytics, something like Tim's project or others, they have access to more information and can do that. So it's not that, nobody should come away thinking we're going to produce some graphs and all of a sudden it's going to make teaching better just because they have a graph. People have to act upon it. It's actionable, but they have to know what the action is, and they have to then work that into how they're teaching a class week by week and as they go through the semester and through their career.
Okay, so we have a couple billion more pieces of information to work with today, and I think we should thank Dan
Oh,
for that. And
thank you.
if anybody has further questions, please come up and ask.
Yep. Thank you.